The sun was just beginning to rise over the small town, casting a soft golden light over the streets. Birds were chirping on the power lines, and the sound of distant traffic started to fill the air. At the edge of the town stood a little workshop. Nothing fancy. Just a small building with faded paint and an old sign that read, Turner's Auto Repair. Inside, a man in his late 40s named Eli was already at work. His hands were rough and stained with grease, but there was something peaceful about the way he moved. He loved what he did, even if most people never looked twice at him. Eli had been fixing cars for years. He didn't own much, just that old garage, a few worn-out tools, and a little house a few streets away. But to him, that was enough. He wasn't after luxury or fame. He found joy in solving problems with his own hands, helping people, and watching their cars drive away running better than before. It was another ordinary morning for Eli. He had a cup of coffee sitting on the counter, the radio softly playing old songs in the background, and a small car lifted on the jack. He hummed quietly as he worked on the engine, focused and calm. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. It was the kind of peace he liked, the kind that came from doing what he loved. Then suddenly the sound of an expensive car engine broke the quiet. It wasn't the rough hum of an old truck or a small family car. This one purred, smooth, deep, powerful. Eli looked up from under the hood, wiping his hands on a rag. A shiny black luxury car slowly pulled up in front of the shop, the sunlight reflecting off its perfect paint. It looked completely out of place in that humble setting. The door opened and out stepped a man in his early 50s wearing a suit that probably cost more than Eli's entire workshop. His shoes were polished, his watch gleamed, and his expression showed confidence, too much of it. He looked around with a frown, clearly uncomfortable with the dusty surroundings. Eli smiled politely and walked over. "Morning, sir," he said kindly. "How can I help you today?" The man didn't smile back. He looked Eli up and down, his eyes pausing at the grease on his overalls. "I'm hearing a strange noise from the engine," the man said. His tone was sharp, as if every word carried a bit of irritation. "I was passing through and saw your shop. I need it fixed quickly. This car cost me a fortune, so be careful with it." Eli nodded, keeping his tone respectful. "Of course, sir. I'll take a look and see what's going on." The man handed him the keys reluctantly, like he was afraid the mechanic might drop them. Eli didn't take it personally. He'd met people like this before, folks who thought the size of their wallet made them more important. He just smiled again and got to work. As Eli popped open the hood, the rich man stood nearby with his arms crossed, watching him closely. He looked around the shop again and shook his head slightly. "This place looks ancient," he muttered under his breath, though loud enough for Eli to hear. "I'm surprised you even know how to handle a car like this. Do you get many customers who can actually afford this kind of thing?" Eli didn't answer right away. He was listening to the engine, gently touching different parts, trying to find where the noise was coming from. Finally, he said calmly, "I've worked on a lot of engines, sir. Every car runs the same way underneath all that shine." The man chuckled, a short, mocking laugh. "Well, maybe to you, but this isn't some old pickup truck. This is the newest luxury model on the market. It's not something a small-town mechanic would know much about." Eli looked at him for a second, then smiled softly. "You'd be surprised what small-town mechanics know." The man shrugged, clearly not convinced. He pulled out his phone and began scrolling, occasionally glancing at his car like it was the most valuable thing in the world. Eli continued his inspection quietly, moving with careful precision. Every motion he made showed experience, steady, confident, practiced. While working, Eli noticed something interesting about the car's design. A small detail under the hood, a tiny marking near one of the engine parts. He recognized it immediately, though he said nothing. His eyes softened for a moment, remembering a different time in his life. Years ago, before opening this small shop, Eli had worked as an engineer for a major car manufacturer. He was part of the design team that helped develop engines for luxury vehicles just like this one. He'd spent years in that world, long nights, big projects, meetings with top executives, but it wasn't the life he wanted forever. After losing his wife to illness, he had chosen to leave the city behind and start fresh, doing something simpler and more meaningful. That was how Turner's Auto Repair was born. The irony made him smile, a man looking down on him, completely unaware that the very car he was so proud of carried parts Eli had helped create. But Eli didn't mention it. He didn't need to. The man, still tapping away at his phone, said suddenly, "You should hurry up. I have an important meeting to attend and I can't afford to waste time here." Eli nodded again. "I'll be as quick as I can, sir." Then came another chuckle from the man. "Honestly, I can't imagine how you survive running a place like this. Do people here even pay you enough to make a living?" Eli looked at him quietly, then smiled. "I make enough to keep the lights on and my family fed. That's all I need." The man raised his eyebrows, clearly unimpressed. "You should aim higher. Success is about having more money, more cars, more houses. If you're not chasing that, what's the point?" Eli didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that some people only understand life through the lens of wealth. He just said gently, "Everyone has a different idea of success." The man shook his head as if he couldn't believe someone could think that way. He turned away, muttering, "No wonder people like this stay poor." Eli heard the words but didn't react. He continued to work, carefully tightening a few bolts and checking the engine's sound. The noise that had bothered the man was caused by a loose connection, an easy fix. Still, Eli took his time, making sure everything was perfect before closing the hood. As he finished, he looked up at the rich man and said, "It's all fixed now. It was just a small issue with the intake valve. You shouldn't hear that sound anymore." The man blinked, surprised. "That fast?" "Yes, sir," Eli replied. "You're good to go?" The man walked toward the car, still skeptical. He got in, started the engine, and listened. The noise was gone, smooth as ever. He gave a small nod, clearly impressed, but too proud to say it out loud. He glanced at Eli again and said, "You actually did a decent job. Didn't expect that, honestly." Eli smiled, wiping his hands with the rag again. "I'm glad you're satisfied." The man smirked slightly, trying to cover up his earlier rudeness. Well, maybe there's still some talent in these small towns after all. Eli nodded again but didn't respond. He could see through the man's words, but he didn't hold a grudge. Life had taught him that some people only learned humility when life forced them to. As the man prepared to leave, he looked back one last time and said, "I hope this fix lasts. This car's very expensive and it's not something you can just tinker with." Eli chuckled softly. "Don't worry, sir. I know this car better than you think." The man didn't understand what he meant, but he didn't ask. He simply gave a polite nod, got in his car and drove away. Leaving behind a trail of dust and the faint sound of the engine, he didn't realize Eli once helped design. Eli stood there for a moment, watching the luxury car disappear down the road. He sighed, then smiled to himself. He turned back toward the garage, picked up his coffee, and took a slow sip. The morning sun had climbed higher, warming his face. Another day, another job done. He didn't need anyone's praise or respect. He knew his worth even if others couldn't see it. Inside the shop, the radio continued to play a gentle tune, and Eli went back to his next task, steady, humble, and quietly proud. Little did that rich man know. This meeting was only the beginning of a lesson he would never forget. The next morning was quiet at Turner's Auto Repair. Eli had just opened the garage door and was sweeping the floor when he saw a familiar black car slowing down in front of his shop again. He looked up, surprised. The same luxury car from yesterday stopped right at the entrance. The driver's window rolled down, and there he was, the same rich man from before, wearing his usual sharp suit and polished shoes. Eli smiled faintly. "Good morning again, sir," he said politely. Did the sound come back? The man got out of the car, his expression half annoyed, half curious. No sound," he said. "The car's fine. But I was passing through town again, and since I had a bit of time, I thought I'd check how you managed to fix it so quickly yesterday." Eli wiped his hands on a cloth and nodded slowly. "Just experience, sir. You work on enough engines and you start to hear what's wrong before you even see it." The man laughed, shaking his head. "Experience? You mean luck?" He looked around the workshop again, wrinkling his nose slightly. "I can't believe a place like this still operates. No modern tools, no fancy machines. It's almost nostalgic." Eli did. The man smirked. "Maybe for you, but for me I like the latest of everything. Newest cars, newest phones, newest houses. You know, things that actually show success." Eli stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "That's one way to look at it." The man leaned against his car and crossed his arms. "You seem like a decent guy, Eli, but you're wasting your talent here. You could work for a big company, make real money. Why settle for this? Eli smiled lightly. I've done that already, he said. Long ago. That caught the man's attention. Oh, really, you? Working for a big company? He let out a short laugh. Come on. Don't tell me you built cars like mine. Eli looked him in the eye, calm and steady. Actually, I did. The man blinked, caught off guard. Wait, you're serious? Eli nodded. Yes. Before opening this shop, I worked in an automotive engineering division. I helped design the engines for some luxury models. Maybe even yours. The man chuckled again, clearly not believing him. You, an engineer? You're joking, right? You look like you've never left this town. Eli didn't argue. He just smiled. The kind of smile that hides 1,000 untold stories. Believe what you like, sir. The man laughed harder this time, shaking his head. That's a good one. You know, you could almost convince people if you wore something other than that oil-stained uniform. Eli only said, What we wear doesn't change what we know. The man stopped laughing but still looked amused. So let's say I believe you. Why would someone who helped build a car like this end up here fixing old engines for peanuts? Doesn't make sense. Eli took a slow breath and said, Sometimes money isn't everything. I used to work long hours chasing promotions and deadlines. One day I realized I was missing life itself. My wife was sick back then and I barely had time to take care of her. When she passed, I promised myself I'd never let work control my life again. The man's face grew still. He didn't laugh this time. Eli continued quietly. So I came back home, opened this shop, and started over. Simple life, simple work, but it's honest. I sleep well at night. The man looked away, clearly unsure how to respond. I see, he said finally. Well, that's quite the story. Eli gave a small nod. Everyone has one. For a few moments, silence filled the air. The man tapped his watch, then said, Still, I can't imagine leaving a big company job for ain't this. You must have lost a lot. Eli looked around at his workshop. The tools, the cars, the sunlight filtering through the dusty windows. Maybe, but I gained something else, peace, freedom. Those are worth more to me than any paycheck. The man shook his head again. You sound like one of those motivational speakers. But trust me, life's about moving up. If you're not chasing success, you're falling behind. Eli just smiled kindly. Maybe you're right. Or maybe you just haven't stopped running long enough to see where you already are. The man didn't reply. For the first time, Eli's words made him think. But he didn't want to admit it. Instead, he changed the subject. Anyway, my car's fine. I'll get going. He got into his car and started the engine. But just as he shifted into gear, he heard a faint clicking noise from the dashboard. He frowned, turned off the car, and got out again. Great, he muttered. Now what? Eli walked over calmly. Mind if I take a quick look? The man stepped aside, still annoyed. Sure, go ahead. Eli opened the hood again, checked a few wires, and within minutes found the issue. A loose sensor connection. He tightened it carefully, closed the hood, and said, There, all fixed. You should be good now. The man looked impressed despite himself. That fast again? You really do know these cars, Eli smiled. Told you so. The man laughed softly this time, not in mockery but in mild surprise. All right, maybe I underestimated you. I'll admit you've got skill. Eli just nodded humbly. Thank you, sir. The man looked at him curiously now. So you really helped design these cars? I still can't wrap my head around that. Eli said, I worked on the engine systems. My team and I spent years perfecting them. Every bolt, every connection. We built them to last. The man ran his hand along the hood, looking thoughtful. That's impressive. I guess I owe you thanks for making a car this good. Eli smiled gently. No need to thank me. Just take care of it, the man laughed. Don't worry. I treat this car better than I treat myself. Eli looked at him, then said quietly, Sometimes we treat things better than people. That line hit the man deeper than he expected. He went quiet, staring at the ground for a moment. There was truth in Eli's words, truth he hadn't wanted to face. All his life he had worked to show off his success, cars, watches, properties. But the more he had, the less he smiled. He changed the subject quickly. Anyway, how much do I owe you for the fix? Eli shook his head. It was a small thing. No charge, the man frowned. No charge? Come on, I can't just walk away without paying. Eli smiled. It took 2 minutes. You already paid me yesterday. Consider this a favor. The man seemed uncomfortable with that answer. I don't take favors easily, Eli replied softly. then take it as kindness. It costs nothing to be kind. That simple sentence lingered in the air. The man didn't respond right away. He looked at Eli, really looked at him for the first time, not as a mechanic, but as a person. There was something genuine in the man's eyes now. A bit of respect, maybe even guilt. He sighed and said, "You're different, Eli. I meet people every day in my business world, and none of them talk like you." Eli chuckled quietly. Maybe because they don't listen to engines all day. Engines teach you patience. The man smiled faintly, shaking his head. "You know, for someone who works with machines, you sure understand people well." Eli shrugged. "People and cars aren't that different. Both need care to keep running right." That made the man laugh again, but this time it was a real laugh, warm, not mocking. "You've got a point." Eli just smiled and handed him the keys. "Drive safe, sir." As the man got back in his car, he paused for a moment before closing the door. "You know, Eli, I used to think success was about what you own, but now I'm not so sure." Eli looked at him kindly. "Maybe you'll figure it out someday." The man nodded thoughtfully, then started the engine. The car purred smoothly, perfect again. He rolled down the window and said, "Thanks again. Maybe I'll stop by next time I'm in town." "You're always welcome," Eli said, waving lightly as the car drove away. As the sound of the engine faded, Eli stood there watching. He could tell that something had changed in the man, even if just a little. Sometimes people didn't need lectures, they needed quiet reminders. And maybe, just maybe, today had been one of those moments. Eli turned back toward his workshop, the morning sun warming his back. He picked up his wrench and went back to work, humming softly to himself. Another day, another story, another lesson. One that wasn't taught in schools or boardrooms, but in the quiet corners of life where humility and wisdom lived side by side. Far down the road, inside the luxury car, the rich man kept thinking about what Eli had said. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about his next deal or his next big purchase. He was thinking about life, the kind of peace money couldn't buy. And that thought stayed with him all the way home. A few weeks passed after that day. Eli continued his quiet life at the small workshop. The same rhythm each morning: unlock the door, switch on the radio, roll up his sleeves, and get to work. He didn't think much about the rich man anymore. People came and went all the time. But sometimes, while tightening a bolt or changing oil, he'd remember that conversation about success, peace, and kindness. He hoped the man had learned something from it. One cool afternoon, while Eli was fixing an old pickup, he heard a familiar sound, the smooth purr of that same luxury car engine. He looked up and smiled to himself. "Well," he said softly, "looks like he's back." The black car pulled up outside, gleaming under the sunlight. The door opened and out stepped the rich man again, but this time he didn't wear his usual arrogance. He looked more relaxed, less proud, more human. He was dressed in a simple shirt, no tie, no fancy attitude. Eli noticed it right away. "Good afternoon, sir," Eli greeted with his usual warmth. "Car giving trouble again?" The man smiled slightly. "No trouble this time. Just thought I'd stop by. Been thinking about what you said last time." Eli nodded kindly. "That's good. Thinking is the first step toward understanding." The man chuckled. "You really talk like some kind of philosopher, you know that?" Eli laughed softly. "Maybe life taught me to slow down and listen more." The man looked around the workshop again. "It's peaceful here," he said after a pause. "No noise, no phone calls, no stress." "I can see why you chose this life," Eli smiled. "Peace doesn't come from where you are. It comes from how you live." The man nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "You're right. I've been running behind things my whole life, money, deals, recognition. But lately, I don't even know what for." He paused and looked down. "I don't even remember the last time I felt calm." Eli gently wiped his hands and said, "You can always start over, sir. It's never too late to find what really matters." The man sighed deeply. "Maybe you're right. You know, I told my driver to drop me off today. I wanted to drive here myself. I guess I needed a little break from that busy world." Eli nodded approvingly. The man smiled almost shyly. "You really have a way with words." They both shared a small laugh. For a while, they just stood there, two men from different worlds, yet somehow understanding each other perfectly. The air smelled of oil and metal, but it wasn't unpleasant. It smelled like work, honesty, and life itself. After a few minutes, the man said, "Actually, I came here for another reason too. My car has a small vibration when I hit higher speeds. It's nothing serious, but I thought you could take a look." Eli nodded and motioned him to bring the car inside. The man drove it in carefully and Eli got to work. As he opened the hood, he noticed something again. A small serial number engraved near the engine mount. It was faint but clear enough to read. That number told a story, a personal one. Eli had engraved it himself years ago when that engine had been built in the factory. It was a little mark he used to leave, a way to remember the machines he helped create. He smiled to himself. This car wasn't just any luxury vehicle. It was one he had personally worked on. While Eli worked, the man walked around, looking at the old photos hanging on the garage wall. Most were faded and yellowed with time. One picture caught his attention. A younger Eli standing beside a group of people wearing company uniforms. Behind them was a large banner with the name of one of the top luxury car manufacturers printed boldly across it. The man frowned and stepped closer. He looked at the photo again, his eyes widening. "Wait a second," he whispered. Eli noticed the silence and looked up. "Something wrong, sir?" The man turned around, pointing at the picture. "Is that you?" Eli wiped his hands on his rag and walked over, smiling. "Yes, that's me. That was taken at the company I told you about." The man's eyes widened even more. "That's the company that makes my car. You weren't joking, were you?" Eli shook his head gently. "No, sir. I told you the truth." The man looked genuinely stunned. He stared at the photo again. Eli, much younger but unmistakably the same person, standing proudly among engineers and designers. "You were really part of the design team?" he asked. Eli nodded. "I worked on the engine systems. That's actually one of the first models we built together. The same model you drive now." The man ran a hand through his hair, still in disbelief. "You mean the person who fixed my car is the same man who helped build it?" Eli chuckled softly. "Looks that way." The man laughed out loud, but it wasn't mocking this time, it was pure astonishment. "I can't believe this. I've been driving around bragging about this car for months, and the man who helped create it was right here in this small town, fixing it for me." Eli smiled, his eyes calm. Life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. The man shook his head, still smiling. "You know, the first time I came here, I laughed at you. I thought you were just another small-town mechanic. I even said you wouldn't understand cars like mine." Eli looked down and smiled faintly. "I remember." The man's face turned serious. "I'm ashamed of that, truly. You had every right to throw me out, but you didn't. You just smiled and helped me anyway." Eli's voice was gentle. "Anger never fixes anything, sir. Besides, everyone learns at their own pace." The man sighed deeply, his tone filled with regret. "You taught me something that day, Eli. Maybe I needed to be humbled a bit." Eli shook his head kindly. "You don't owe me anything. The world teaches all of us in its own way. Some lessons just take longer to see." The man looked at him, his eyes soft now. "Still, I want to thank you. You could have told me who you were from the start." Eli chuckled. "Would it have changed anything? You wouldn't have believed me anyway." The man laughed again, realizing how true that was. "You're right. I wouldn't have." They both laughed quietly together. Then Eli said, "Your car's ready now. That vibration should be gone." The man looked at him with genuine respect now. No arrogance, no pride. "You really are something else, Eli. Not just a great mechanic, but a good man." Eli smiled humbly. "I just do my best." The man reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and took out a thick wad of bills. "Please take this. Not as payment, but as a thank you." Eli shook his head immediately. "That's too much." "I don't need it," the man insisted. "You deserve it. You've helped me more than you know, not just with the car, but with how I see life." Eli thought for a moment, then gently pushed the money back into the man's hand. "If you really want to thank me, do something kind for someone who can't repay you. That's worth more than this." The man looked at him quietly, moved by those words. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "I will, I promise," Eli smiled. "Then that's all the thanks I need." They stood there for a moment, the silence filled with mutual respect. The wind rustled through the open garage door and the sunlight reflected off the luxury car, a car that had unknowingly connected two very different lives. Finally, the man said softly, "You know, Eli, I think this car has taught me more than I ever expected." Eli chuckled. "It's not the car that taught you, sir. It's life. The car was just part of the lesson. The man smiled, understanding the meaning behind those words. He extended his hand and Eli shook it firmly, grease-stained hands meeting polished ones equal at last. As the man drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Eli was standing outside, wiping his hands and waving lightly, just like before. But this time the man didn't see a mechanic. He saw a teacher, someone who had reminded him that real success wasn't measured by what you owned, but by who you were. Driving down the long road, the man felt lighter. The car hummed smoothly, but the real change wasn't under the hood, it was inside him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his next deal, his next car, or his next luxury purchase. He was thinking about kindness, humility, and gratitude. Back at the workshop, Eli took a slow breath and looked around his little garage. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of life, the quiet kind of success that didn't need anyone's approval. He smiled to himself, took a sip of his coffee, and went back to work. Steady hands, calm heart, and the peace of knowing he'd once again fixed more than just an engine. Everything glow a little. Finally, the man said, "You know what the funniest part is? I always thought my car was built by people in fancy labs wearing white coats. Never imagined one of those minds would end up here in this quiet little town." Eli smiled, looking at the car. "You'd be surprised where greatness hides, sir. Sometimes in big offices, sometimes in small garages." The man nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll never forget this." He paused, then reached into his pocket and took out his wallet. "Please let me pay you extra for all your help. It's the least I can do." Eli waved his hand gently. "No, sir. You've already paid for the repairs." The man shook his head. "This isn't for the repairs. This is my way of saying thank you for the lesson you gave me." Eli smiled warmly but still refused. "If you really want to thank me, do something good for someone who can't return the favor. That's how kindness travels." The man looked at him silently, touched by his words. He slowly put the wallet back in his pocket and said, "You have my word." "I'll do that," Eli smiled. "That's enough for me." The man extended his hand, and this time when Eli shook it, it wasn't out of formality or pride. It was genuine respect. Two very different hands, one soft and polished, one rough and worn, meeting as equals. Before getting back into his car, the man said quietly, "You know, Eli, when I first met you, I saw nothing special. Now I realize I met someone I want to be more like." Eli smiled modestly. "Be yourself, sir. Just be a little kinder than yesterday. That's all anyone can do." The man nodded, his eyes warm with respect. "I will, and I'll make sure I remember this place for the rest of my life." He started his car, and as the engine hummed softly, he rolled down the window one last time. "Thank you for everything." Eli gave a small wave. "Take care of yourself. And your car too." The man laughed lightly. "I will, though I'll never look at it the same way again." As the car drove away, Eli watched it disappear down the dusty road, the sunlight reflecting off its polished surface. He could tell that this time, the man was leaving with more than just a fixed car. He was leaving with a changed heart. Eli took a slow breath and looked around his small workshop. The air smelled of oil and fresh air. The same old radio played softly in the corner. Nothing had changed, and yet something had. He smiled to himself, quietly grateful. Life had a way of teaching people through simple moments. Some lessons came through pain, some through kindness, and sometimes through a humble mechanic in a small-town garage. Eli picked up his tools again, humming softly as he went back to work. The world outside kept moving fast, but inside that little shop, everything was just as it should be, peaceful, honest, and full of quiet wisdom. A month passed after the day the rich man found out who Eli really was. Life went on, but something inside that man had quietly changed. He still had his company, his meetings, and his expensive things, but they didn't give him the same thrill anymore. Every time he sat behind his big desk, wearing his suit and shiny watch, he found his mind drifting back to that small garage. Eli's calm voice echoed in his memory. "Peace doesn't come from where you are. It comes from how you live." The man had heard thousands of motivational speeches before, but none had stayed with him like those simple words from the small-town mechanic. One evening, after another long, exhausting day at work, he sat by the window of his grand office. The city lights sparkled below, cars moved like glowing ants, and people rushed everywhere. But in all that noise and motion, he felt strangely empty. He realized how much time he had spent chasing things that never lasted. Money, power, attention. He had treated people like numbers and judged them by what they owned. He sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead. Maybe I've been running in the wrong direction all along, he murmured. For the first time, he decided to take a break. Not the kind filled with luxury trips and meetings, but a real break. The next morning, he canceled his usual appointments and drove out of the city. His hands rested on the steering wheel of the same black luxury car that Eli had once fixed. The road stretched endlessly. Fields on both sides, open sky above. For once, he didn't rush. He drove slowly, letting the breeze hit his face. Somewhere deep inside, he felt lighter. After a few hours, he reached the small town again, the one he had never paid attention to before. The workshop looked the same. Small, old, with the same faded board that said Turner's Auto Repair. He parked outside and stepped out, feeling strangely at home. Eli was inside, bent over an old car, humming softly to the radio. When he looked up and saw the man, his face lit up with that same calm smile. "Well, look who's back," Eli said, wiping his hands. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon." The man smiled. "I guess I just missed the peace around here." Eli laughed gently. "Peace, huh? You can find that anywhere if you look in the right place." The man looked around the small shop and took a deep breath. "You were right about that. You know, I've been thinking a lot since the last time we spoke. I realized how empty my life has been. I have everything people dream of, but still something's missing." Eli leaned against the counter. "Sometimes what's missing isn't something you can buy." The man nodded slowly. "Exactly. That's what I'm learning. I keep thinking about your words, about kindness, about starting over. So I decided to make some changes." Eli smiled, curious. "What kind of changes?" The man hesitated for a moment, then said, "I started treating people differently at work. My employees, I used to order them around, never asked how they were doing. Now I listen. I even promoted one of my workers who's been loyal for years but was always overlooked." He cried that day. "I never realized how much a little kindness can mean." Eli's eyes softened. "That's a good start, sir. Kindness grows the more you share it," the man nodded. "You know, I even visited a shelter last week. Donated some supplies and food. But it wasn't about the donation. It was about talking to people there, hearing their stories. It changed something in me." Eli smiled gently. "You're learning fast." The man laughed lightly. "Well, I have a good teacher." Eli shook his head. "Life is your teacher, not me. I just handed you the lesson." They both smiled. The man looked thoughtful again. "It's strange. I used to think people like me were at the top and people like you were below. But now I see it differently. You're richer than me in ways money can't measure." Eli chuckled softly. "I'm not rich, sir. I just learned to be content." "That's all?" "Content," the man repeated, thinking about the word. "That's what I've been missing all along." There was a comfortable silence after that. The sound of the wind outside mixed with the faint hum of the radio. It felt peaceful, something rare in the man's life. After a while, the man said, "You know, I've been thinking of investing in something that matters. Maybe open a workshop in the city, one that gives work to people who need a second chance. I'd like your help with it." Eli looked at him surprised. "My help? I'm just a small-town mechanic." The man smiled. "That's exactly why I want your help. You know how to build things that last, not just machines, but trust. I can provide the money, but you can provide the heart." Eli thought for a moment, then smiled softly. "If it helps people, I'm in. But only if we do it right, honest work, fair wages, no shortcuts." The man nodded firmly. "Agreed." Eli extended his hand and they shook on it. There was no contract, no fancy paperwork, just two men and a promise. Over the next few weeks, they met often. The man visited the town again and again, and each time he came, he seemed a little less like the proud businessman Eli first met, and a little more like a grounded human being. He asked questions, listened more, even laughed more. Sometimes they would sit outside the shop after work, sipping tea and watching the sunset. The man would talk about his stressful corporate days, and Eli would share simple stories from the garage, stories of people who couldn't afford repairs but always came back to say thank you. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the man said, "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were beneath me, but now I realize I was the one who didn't understand life at all. Eli smiled faintly. Understanding comes from humility. We all learn when we're ready. The man looked out at the quiet road ahead. You taught me something no school or business could. I used to think success was about how high you climb. Now I see it's about how many people you lift along the way. Eli nodded. That's a lesson most people learn too late. The man turned to him. I'm glad I learned it now. They sat there in silence for a while, watching the last rays of sunlight fade. The world felt still, as if time had slowed down just to let them breathe. After a few minutes, Eli said softly, You've changed a lot, sir. I can see it in your eyes, the man smiled. I guess I just stopped pretending. For the first time, I'm not trying to impress anyone. I'm just trying to be better. That's the best goal there is, Eli said. When it was time to leave, the man stood up and looked at the small workshop one last time. You know, he said quietly, this place feels more like home than my mansion ever did. Eli smiled warmly. Maybe that's because home isn't about walls and roofs. It's about peace and people. The man nodded slowly. You're right again. He extended his hand and Eli shook it firmly. Thank you, my friend, the man said. You didn't just fix my car. You fixed something inside me. Eli smiled humbly. I didn't fix anything, you did. I just gave you the wrench. The man laughed, his voice lighter than it had been in years. You and your words. I'll remember them forever. As he drove away, the evening light reflected off the smooth body of the car, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a symbol of pride. It felt like a reminder. A reminder of a lesson learned in a small garage by a man who understood that happiness wasn't built from money, but from meaning. Back inside, Eli returned to his workbench. The day had been long, but his heart felt light. He took a slow sip of his tea and smiled to himself. He didn't need recognition or praise. Knowing that someone had truly changed because of a few honest words, that was enough. The radio played softly in the background as he picked up his tools again. Outside, the sky turned shades of pink and orange, and a gentle wind blew through the open door. In that quiet workshop, among the smell of oil and the sound of distant cars, two very different